Rancher lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot returned, his missing horse, Rancher. Lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot returned his missing horse. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the tale. I thought I'd never see it again, until the giant shadow brought it back. Montana, late winter. A thick fog blanketed the valley, swallowing the snow-capped mountains behind the ranch. The silence was so deep that the wind sweeping through the faded wooden fence sounded like a whisper. The barn door creaked open, warm air spilling out before quickly dissolving into the biting cold. The rancher paused on the doorstep, his rough hand still carrying the scent of dry grass. Before him, standing in the snow-covered yard, was the black horse that had been missing for months, mane-tangled breath forming clouds in the cold air. Beside it stood a giant silhouette hazy in the mist, taller than any man the rancher had ever met. Their eyes met for just a moment, then the shadow slowly retreated, heavy steps fading into the white haze as if it had never been there at all. I was used to loss until that morning. Late winter in Montana was unforgiving. On that high, dry land, the cold was like a dull blade, slow but relentless, seeping through every layer of fabric, every crack in the bones. His ranch sat alone at the edge of the mountain range where the trail disappeared into pine forests, and fog lingered all morning, reluctant to fade. He had lived there long enough to know silence came in many forms, some light as a thin blanket, others heavy as a stone pressing down on the chest. For months his silence was the latter, ever since the black horse vanished without a trace. It wasn't just an animal, it was a companion through countless winds and dusty trails. That morning, before the sun had risen above the mountains, he was splitting wood when he heard barely from beyond the gate the sound of hoofbeats. Steady and low, not hurried. Each beat struck a familiar chord deep in his memory, making him freeze mid-swing, the axe still buried in the log. His heart raced, not from the cold. He knew that sound. He'd heard it thousands of times on the trail's early hunts, late returns from storms. But how? If it were you hearing a sound you thought lost forever, what would you do? Would you rush outside or stand still to make sure it wasn't a dream? Share your thoughts, because that morning he chose to step out, and everything began there. Part 1. The Unexpected Encounter. Morning fog in Montana has a way of making everything feel distant. It wraps around the landscape, pushing the world just out of reach, making a man forget there's warmth beyond the chill. His ranch yard that day was a sea of gray-white, the faded wooden fence barely visible, and the far gate nothing more than a ghostly shape hidden in the mist. He stepped slowly from the porch, the soft crunch of snow under his boots. Each step drew him closer to the sound he'd just heard, the horse's hoofbeats seeming to separate from the air, growing clearer, nearer. His heart pounded so loud he could hear it ringing in his ears. Then, through the white haze, a familiar shape appeared. The black horse, its mane tangled flanks rising and falling with strong breaths. Snow clung to its hooves and back, but its eyes, oh, those eyes were the same ones he knew better than any trail in Montana. He froze, disbelief caught in his throat. Months of searching, then acceptance of loss, only for it to stand just a few steps away now. But that wasn't the only thing that left him speechless. Beside the horse, nearly twice its height, stood a giant shadow. Not a man, not a bear. A sturdy frame covered in thick, dark fur shoulders, broad enough to block the entire trail. The mist swirled around it, but could not hide the massive figure. Their eyes met. Not for long, just a few heartbeats, but long enough to feel a lifetime in that moment. Fear, awe, gratitude, and something like recognition. The horse shifted closer as if to say it belonged here. The giant creature slowly tilted its head, then stepped back, heavy footsteps pressing deep into the snow, echoing like the drums of an ancient ritual. Then it vanished into the white, leaving behind a space larger than any forest clearing. He stood there trembling, hand resting on the horse's neck, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. He closed his eyes briefly, needing to believe this was real and not a dream. If you were the one who, after months of losing what mattered most, suddenly woke to find it returned, and with it a mystery beyond understanding, what would you do? Would you run inside, lock the door tight? Or stand still, letting the moment carve itself deep into your heart? The black horse's breath rose in white mist, drifting upward, then fading into the gray fog. He kept his hand resting longer than usual on its neck, as if afraid that letting go would make everything vanish. The familiar scent of horsehair mingled with dry grass, the same smell that had accompanied hundreds of journeys over mountain passes, through forests, and across streams. He remembered the last time he saw it last spring, a morning when the barn door blew open in the wind, and it never returned. He'd searched for weeks, tracked every footprint, asked every hunter, only to be met with shakes of the head and sympathetic eyes. In the end, he forced himself to believe it had fallen somewhere or been taken by strangers. Yet now, in the harsh heart of winter, it stood before him whole and strong, as if carrying the warmth of another world. He bent down for a closer look, noticing small scratches on the saddle, a few strange long hairs caught on the leather strap. When he touched them, they were softer and thicker than any mountain creature's fur he'd ever known. On the horse's back, faint marks showed where a rope had recently been untied. The horse said nothing, but its eyes told another story, a story of months spent far from him, journeying with that giant figure, now returning like an unexpected gift. He wanted to call out, to ask questions, but living alone had taught him that some moments should never be broken by words. Sometimes standing there, hand on the horse's neck, letting that warmth speak for itself, is enough. He led the horse slowly toward the barn, each step feeling like crossing a fragile line between reality and dream. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the fog still thick, and somewhere within that white veil, he sensed eyes watching him. At the barn door, the horse paused. It turned its head toward the deep forest, the place where the giant shadow had vanished. For a moment he thought he heard a heavy breath, unlike the wind, unlike any beast he knew. A sound slow and deep, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He stood still, motionless. Silence surrounded him, broken only by his own heartbeat. He knew the creature was still there, just a few hundred steps away, hidden behind the mist and ancient pines, neither advancing nor retreating, as if ensuring the gift had been safely delivered. The horse stepped inside the barn hooves, tapping softly on the wooden floor. He closed the door, but didn't latch it. For some reason, it didn't feel necessary. When he turned back, the ranch yard was empty, save for the large footprints pressed deep in the snow, running parallel to the horse's tracks toward the forest. The marks would fade under the wind within hours, but he knew he'd remember every curve like the lines of a face met once in a dream. He sat down on the porch step, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the forest. The feeling in his chest wasn't just relief, it was gratitude. Gratitude for something beyond all rules and reason that had chosen to bring his companion home. That midday, the weak sunlight timidly pierced through the lingering mist, casting silver streaks across the horse barn's roof. He spent the entire morning inside, gently brushing the horse's tangled mane while keenly listening for any sound from the forest beyond. His hands moved slowly, not from fatigue, but to savor every moments when he could touch it, hear its breath, and feel the familiar strength of its body. Beneath the saddle, he discovered another sign. A small piece of braided wildgrass, twisted tightly and skillfully, far beyond the work of any rough hands. The strand bore no color or pattern of the border folk, nor did it resemble anything from the hunters or native tribes he knew. He thought back to the giant's eyes this morning, neither hostile nor fearful. There was something ancient and deep there, like two strangers recognizing a bond from a past life. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the forest's voice, old pines whistling, dry branches snapping, and a low, warm sound he knew he would never forget. It wasn't clear enough to call a call yet. It tightened his chest with its presence. He wondered perhaps this morning wasn't just a reunion with the horse, but the beginning of a connection he never imagined. As dusk settled, the sky took on the dull gray of old steel. The morning fog had thinned, revealing the trail into the woods, the very path where the giant shadow had slowly faded earlier. The huge footprints remained sharp, deep pits pressed into the snow, like molds cast from prehistoric times. He stepped outside and paused where the horse had stood when he first saw it. The image lingered in his mind, the breath-forming clouds, the horse's ears pricked, and beside it the giant shape melting into the whiteness. The feeling wasn't a dream, nor a tale spun to frighten children. It was real, and it had changed something deep inside him. He knelt, placing his rough hand onto the largest footprint. Cold, damp. The snow's edge crumbled slightly, showing it was fresh. Somehow he felt more comforted than afraid, as if the creature's presence was not a threat, but a silent form of protection. Night fell faster than usual. When the first stars flickered in the sky, he still stood there, eyes fixed on the forest. No one appeared, but he knew somewhere out there the giant shadow lingered, an invisible guardian at the gate. Returning to the cabin, he closed the door behind him but didn't latch it, the usual winter habit he performed without thought. This time it was different. He left the door slightly ajar, like an invitation, or a silent way of saying, "I have received your gift." Part 2. A strange sign. That night, snow continued to fall softly outside, each flake quietly settling on the thick crust of frozen earth. Inside the stable, the warmth from the black horse's body and the flickering fireplace in the corner created a rare stillness, broken only by the steady breaths and the crackling of burning wood. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes tracing the powerful muscles as the horse lowered its head to the hay trough. His rough hand stroked the mane slowly, as if reading from an old journal. Then he noticed something behind the saddle, something out of place. A piece of animal hide, thick, heavy, dark brown, covered with long silky fur, unlike any wild creature in Montana. He untied the straps and lifted it up. The scent immediately wrapped around him, not the stench of hunted game nor dry grass or mud. It was the smell of untouched, deep forest, of cold rains clinging to thick fur, and a strange smoke, not from pine or birchwood, but from a tree he could not name. He placed the hide on the wooden table inside the stable, the firelight shimmering on it, as if it held its own warmth. The edges were rough, torn by a force beyond human strength, yet arranged with a neatness as if shaped by hands skilled in craft. He stared at the hide for a long while, a strange feeling stirring inside, not mere curiosity or fear, but as if he had just received a wordless message sent from a place he'd never set foot. When the horse finished eating and tucked its head into the corner to rest, he still stood there, fingers tracing the soft fur. He knew the giant shadow from this morning hadn't just returned the horse. It had left a mark, a part of its story, right in his hands. If it were you and a stranger not of this human world sent you a gift whose meaning you could not fully grasp, would you keep it close as a keepsake, or see it as an invitation to step deeper into a land of the unknown? The wind shifted outside, howling through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying the sharp scent of cold snow inside, mingling with the smoke from the hearth and the faint musk from the animal hide. He sat down on an old wooden chair, pulling the hide closer to the firelight, as if trying to peel back the layers of secrets hidden within. The fur was soft, yet thick, with an undercoat almost like wool, something rare even among the fiercest mountain beasts this winter. As he brushed his hand against the grain, it felt alive, as if still breathing the essence of the place it once belonged to. His hand stopped at a long cut, not sharp like steel nor crude like flint. It looked torn by an immense force, yet precisely where it needed to be, no excess, no lack. As if the hand behind it was not only powerful, but deliberate, preserving only the best. He leaned back against the wall, eyes gently closed. Amidst the crackling fire and the whistling wind, he pictured his horse roaming forest trails, shadowed by that towering figure, a hand touching its mane, a silent gaze watching like a guardian at the gate. And on some night that giant shadow had fastened this hide onto the saddle, a sign saying, "It's with me, it's safe." When he opened his eyes, the firelight still shimmered on the brown fur, casting a faint red glow like embers smoldering beneath the surface. Suddenly, a new warmth blossomed within him, not from the fire, but from the thought that somewhere in this vast, wild world, someone or something had chosen to stand with him. He moved the hide to a wooden table near the stable door, where moonlight filtered through the boards, casting a pale silver band. Under that cold light, the fur reflected differently, not warm like near the hearth, but sharp and wild like steel. He noticed a fastening at the edge tied with a braided strand of wildgrass. The dried cord was stiff, but its twists were so regular and tight that an ordinary hand could hardly have made it. This grass wasn't from around here. He knew because every winter he scoured the area for his horse's feed and had never seen a fiber so soft yet so durable. He untied the knot, holding it in his palm. The strange weave seemed made without looking yet, was firm and skillful. It reminded him of ancient rituals where hands crafted not just tools but messages. He didn't speak it aloud, but deep down, he knew he held a trace not just from a wild creature but from a mind that understood the meaning of giving and receiving. The horse flicked its head, the saddle jingling briefly. He turned and caught its eyes gleaming in the dark as if trying to say something only he could understand. He folded the hide, placed it on a high shelf, and stood quietly for a while. In his heart, the memory of that morning and the hand that had fastened this gift onto the saddle grew into certainty. Among all the unknowns in this world, there was a place made just for him, and now he had touched it. Part 3. Danger approaches. That afternoon, the Montana sky wore the cold gray of iron. The sun sank behind the mountain range early, leaving behind a chilly light that crept over the thin grasslands. A wind blew down from the forest, carrying the damp scent of melting snow and a distant sound like breaking branches that made him glance toward the woods. He sat at the table, fingers twisting the braided wild grass from the animal hide, still undecided where to keep it, when a knock came at the door. Not the soft knock of a friend, nor the urgent pounding of a man in distress. It was slow, heavy in groups of 3, almost like a warning. "We're not leaving until you open." He stood crossing the creaking wooden floor. The door swung open, revealing 3 men on the porch. Thick brown coats, hats pulled low over eyes, hunting rifles slung behind their backs. No smiles. The wind flared their coats, revealing brass cartridges gleaming faintly in the dim light. The tallest, with a thick beard, spoke first. "We've heard you've been around these parts for a while." He said nothing, just nodded slightly. "We found footprints, very big ones, leading straight this way." Silence fell. Only the wind howled through the cracks, and the soft tapping of hooves on ice echoed somewhere behind them. He knew his black horse was still in the barn, and he also knew there was more than just its footprints out there. "We want to inspect the stable." The man's tone wasn't a request, but a command wrapped in a few polite words. His hand rested firm on the door frame, unmoving. Their eyes met, steady, unyielding. His heart beat slow and strong, not from fear for himself, but from dread they might discover what he intended to keep hidden from everyone. The wind grew fierce, whipping fine snowflakes against his cheek. They clung to his beard, melting into icy droplets. The 3 men remained rooted, shifting only slightly to brace against the gusts, eyes locked on him. He stepped aside just enough not to let them in, but to block the doorway entirely. The cabin door was narrow, and his frame nearly sealed the entrance. He knew well that once they crossed this threshold, the secrets he guarded would no longer be safe. The bearded man narrowed his eyes. "It'll only take a few minutes. We don't want trouble." He looked the man dead in the eye, voice low but firm enough to drown out the wind. "The stable's mine. Everything inside is mine." A taut silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. The man on the right tilted his head, eyes flicking toward the row of barns behind the cabin. He sensed a hand shift, ready to move. Images from that morning flashed in his mind, the giant shadow in the mist, the horse exhaling white breath, the animal hide tied neatly behind the saddle. Part of him wanted to keep it all to himself. The other part knew that if they found out, the creature might never come back. "We're not here for your horse." The bearded man's tone softened, yet every word carried weight. "We're hunting something else." His gaze didn't waver. "I don't see what you're looking for." A cold gust swept past, billowing the tarp behind them, revealing large steel traps that could snap the leg of a grown bear. He knew well if those were set in the forest behind, the line between hunter and hunted would vanish. The cold crept into the cabin through the door's crack, carrying with it the metallic scent of the traps that had just been uncovered beneath the tarp. That smell, dragged memories of crossing mountain passes where trapped animals had been left behind, their blood staining the snow a deep red. The bearded man's gaze remained fixed as if trying to force him to step aside. The other two glanced swiftly around the yard, one scanning the area, the other shifting his shoulders looking for a way in. He knew he stood at a crossroads, let them enter or hold his ground, and make this doorway an unbreachable boundary. And he also knew that one wrong move could expose the secret from that morning. Inside the stable, the horse stirred slightly. The soft tapping of hooves echoed against the wooden floor, then fell silent. He didn't need to see it to imagine the way its ears pricked, listening intently as he was. Somewhere deep in the forest could that giant shadow be listening too, watching from a distance just close enough to see, but not interfere. He took a deep breath, hand still resting lightly on the doorframe, but his voice had hardened with resolve. "I won't let you in. Not today. Not ever." The wind whipped fiercely against the fence, creaking a long warning groan. The three men fell silent for a beat. Then the bearded one nodded quietly. "If you see anything, you know who to find." They turned, stepping down from the porch, crunching the fresh snow beneath their boots. The sound of hooves faded into the distance until only the wind and his own breath filled the cold air. He stood still a while longer, waiting until he was certain they were gone. Then he closed the door, this time securing the latch tightly. The late afternoon shadows stretched fully over the mountain range. When he left the doorway, the light spilling into the cabin was little more than a thin golden streak, the last trace of sunset, too weak to push back the chill that seeped through every crack in the wood. He walked out behind the house, following the narrow path to the stable. Each step on the crisp snow rang clear in the returning silence. His horse stood quietly in its stall, deep black eyes watching him as if asking, "Are they gone yet?" He placed his hand on its neck, feeling the steady beat of its heart beneath the warm fur. No words spoken, but his grip tightened gently, a silent reassurance. In the corner of the stall, the animal hide still rested where he'd left it, its faint wild musk growing stronger after the cold wind swept through moments ago. Beyond the forest, he caught a distant sound, neither the snap of a branch nor the crunch of footsteps, but a slow, heavy rhythm far away. He paused, cocked his ear, then fell into silence. In that moment, he felt clearly that he hadn't just protected a secret. He had taken a side that did not belong to mankind yet, was the only side his heart could find peace with. The wind stirred again, causing the stable's chain to jingle softly. He closed the door, stepped back onto the yard, eyes fixed on the trail leading into the woods where the giant footprints had nearly been covered by fresh snow. He knew that if the hunters ever returned, the traces would be gone, but his choice today would remain an invisible fence standing firm between two worlds. As night settled over the valley, the temperature dropped sharply. His breath thickened into clouds of smoke each time he stepped out onto the porch. The moon peeked through gray clouds, casting a thin silver veil over the ranch yard, just enough to illuminate the fence, before plunging everything into shadow. He sat on the porch steps, a cup of cold coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the distant forest. The bearded man's words echoed in his mind. "If you see anything, you know who to find." But he knew the truth, he never would. Not because he didn't see, but because he had chosen silence. A wind blew in from the woods, cold, but carrying the scent of damp pine and a faint, unusual smoke, exactly like the smell from the animal hide. He felt as if unseen eyes were watching him from the darkness, not threatening, not urging, just quietly present. The horse in the barn tossed its mane and lightly stomped its hooves, as if responding to something he couldn't hear. He glanced toward it, then back to the forest. Despite the distance and the veil of night, he knew for sure that somewhere out there the giant shadow still lingered, and if needed, it would appear again, just like that morning. He took a deep breath, letting the cold fill his chest, then nodded softly toward the woods. No word spoken, but it was a promise all the same. Part 4. The Silent. Thank you. Night fell gently but deeply, like a black blanket spreading over the valley. The full moon hung high, its silver light quietly pouring over the rows of fences and the snow-covered ranch yard. Each sparkling snowflake seemed awakened, reflecting the cold moonlight with a beauty that stung the heart. Inside the kitchen, he stood near the table where a small oil lamp cast a soft glow. On the table lay a rough cloth bag he had just taken from the storeroom. Beside it, fragrant bundles of dry grass and a few sweet carrots he had saved for the horse during lean days. Slowly, carefully, he gathered the grass into the bag, then added the carrots, filling it gently. His hands moved with the care of someone writing a letter, each stroke carrying a piece of his heart. When he tied the bag's mouth, he used a soft leather cord, the same type used to fasten a saddle, and made a neat knot. Not for decoration, but so the receiver, if truly understanding, would know this was a gift prepared with respect. Stepping outside, he pulled his coat collar high. The door creaked softly, then fell silent. Before him, the moonlight dusted each branch and curve of the snow. In the distance, an ancient pine tree stood near the ranch gate, steadfast as a guardian familiar with storms and summer heat alike. That was where the gift would be left. He moved slowly, each booted step pressing deep into the snow, leaving a dark trail from the porch to the tree. When he reached the spot, he bent down, setting the bag of grass and carrots neatly the opening facing the forest, a silent greeting sent into the night. He straightened, stepping back a few paces. The moonlight revealed each breath he exhaled, dissolving softly into the gentle wind. From this distance he could watch, without intruding. No calls, no signals, just waiting. He stood hidden behind the fence where the cabin's shadow merged with the night's darkness. The valley was so quiet that even the fall of snow from pine branches sounded clear. The moon stretched wide like a silver cloth draping over the pine's base where the bag waited. Time slowed as if each minute doubled. He heard the wind shift blowing from the forest with the thick scent of pine resin and a strange smoky aroma, the same scent he had come to know from the animal hide and the braided grass cord. Then he saw it. A dark figure grew larger from within the woods, stepping forward with steady, deliberate steps. The moonlight caught the giant's silhouette, highlighting the thick cloak of fur. Each footprint pressed deeply into the snow, leaving large, round impressions. It moved neither hurriedly nor stealthily, as if its presence here was natural and unquestioned. It stopped before the pine tree. Instead of immediately touching the grass bag, it bowed its head silently, as if sniffing or sensing something beyond human perception. Then, the large fur-covered hand gently lifted the bag. The motion was strangely delicate, a stark contrast to the massive frame. He tightened his grip on the fence, not out of fear, but a swelling feeling in his chest, gratitude and reverence. No words were spoken yet. Both he and the creature understood this unspoken exchange. "I accept this gift, and I know why you left it here." The figure turned and slowly disappeared back into the forest. The moonlight followed its steps until the giant shadow melted among the dark pine trunks, leaving the tree base empty, as if no one had ever been there. He remained still, eyes fixed on the deep shadows. The wind from the woods blew again, this time carrying a peacefulness, as if they had just sealed a silent pact known only to them. The snow beneath his feet still held deep boot prints, but the yard near the pine tree was now bare. Only the giant footprints remained running parallel to the flattened patches where the gift bag had once been placed. He stepped out from his hiding spot, moving slowly toward the pine tree. Not to retrieve the bag, he knew it was gone, but just to stand where moments ago two worlds had touched without a single word spoken. The moon hung high, its silver light sharpening every detail, the edges of each footprint, every dry blade of grass fallen in the snow, and the cold seeping deep into his hand as he placed it on the ground. He closed his eyes gently, imprinting this feeling into his memory. The feeling that he had done the right thing, not because anyone forced him, but because of a deep inner calling. The wind blew softly from the forest, lighter than before, like the fleeting touch of an invisible hand. He inhaled deeply. The scent of pine resin still lingered, accompanied by a faint trace of smoke. For a moment he thought he heard footsteps, fading away, steady and deep, blending with the heartbeat of the earth. Turning back toward the cabin, he walked slowly through the snow, leaving a trail of footprints leading from the gate to the house. Each step seemed to seal a promise that he would keep this secret no matter what happens. When the wooden door closed behind him, silence filled the space. But inside him, a void had been filled not with words or glances, but with an invisible trust exchanged between two beings who belonged to different worlds. He rekindled the fire in the hearth. The flickering flames reflected on the wooden walls, casting long shadows intertwined like the breath of the room. The black horse slept peacefully in its stall, no sound but the crackling wood. On the table, he placed an old chipped ceramic cup and poured the last bit of coffee left from the afternoon. The warmth gently spread across his face, but his mind remained outside near the pine tree, where the giant shadow had bent to receive the bag of grass. He remembered every slow movement, every unforced pause. He knew that gift could never repay what that creature had done for him returning the horse. But tonight's act was not about repayment. It was to say, "I see you. I understand." No words needed, no hands exchanged. In this place, sometimes silence is the only thing strong enough to carry the heart. He drained his coffee, set the cup down. The hearth crackled softly as if someone had nodded in approval. He leaned back in his chair, eyes slowly closing, listening to the wind from the forest echo a gentle reply. If one day you wanted to send thanks to someone you couldn't meet in person, how would you let them feel the warmth of your heart? Part 5. The gift in return. The next morning, the first light of day slipped through the mountain crevice, thin and faint as if not yet ready to tear apart the dense mist still blanketing the valley. The air remained biting cold, but the wind had softened, carrying the fresh scent of pine resin and damp earth. He stepped onto the porch, his thick coat draped over his shoulders, breath turning into white mist. Everything was so peaceful that he thought the previous night was just a dream, until his eyes stopped at the fence by the gate. On the horizontal wooden beam, right where his hand always rested when opening the gate, there was something unusual. He walked slowly toward it, each step crunching crisply in the snow. As he drew near, he clearly saw it, a rustic wooden ring carved with flowing curved lines like waves repeating in a natural rhythm, not perfectly symmetrical. The wood still smelled of fresh resin, indicating it was made just last night. He lifted it with his hand. The surface was smooth in the carved areas, but still retained rough patches where no polishing was done, as if the maker wanted to leave traces of their hand. The carvings weren't mere decoration. They resembled symbols, a story told in a language unwritten. Standing there in the pale silver morning light, he understood this was a reply, not with words or loud actions, but through a small, simple object containing all the recognition. He clasped the ring in his hand, feeling warmth deeper than even his thick gloves. At that moment, the distance between two worlds shrank, not by steps, but by an invisible thread of trust connecting from that giant hand to his own. He turned the wooden ring under the dim morning light. In one corner, a deeper carved line formed an irregular break, but as he traced it with his finger, he realized it wasn't a flaw, it was intentional. A symbol, perhaps a name or a secret mark. The wood was still slightly damp. Bringing it close to his nose, he smelled pine resin mixed with a faint trace of smoke, the same smoke scent he had recognized from the animal hide. His heart quickened, not from surprise but certainty. The creature had crafted this ring with the same hands that tied the grass bag last night, with the breath that had accompanied his horse through months of disappearance. He leaned against the fence, gazing at the ring as if reading a letter. No written words, no spoken voice. But he understood this was the answer to the gift he left by the pine tree. Not just I received it, but also I see you. I know you understand. That moment warmed his chest despite the biting cold of the early winter morning. There are things that people spend their entire lives seeking: a recognition, a connection, a reason to believe they are not entirely alone. He had just received that from a being no one believed to exist. He stepped back and looked toward the forest. Nothing but tall, straight pines and a thin mist dissolving. Yet he knew somewhere in that darkness, eyes were still watching, waiting for him to hang the ring where it could be seen. He stepped into the cabin, still clutching the wooden ring tightly, as if fearing that letting go would make the warmth inside it vanish with the morning mist. The room still held the scent of coffee from the night before, and the fireplace was cold with only a few glowing embers flickering beneath the ashes. He rekindled the fire. Sparks caught on the dry wood flames, flickering and illuminating every carved line on the ring. The fire made the wood grain seem to move the hand-carved curves, turning into small, rolling waves. He sat quietly watching the flames and the gift, feeling as though they were conversing in a language he was just beginning to learn. Above the fireplace on the wooden wall hung an old nail he had once planned to remove. Now he saw it as the only fitting place. He stood and hung the ring there. It swayed gently, catching the firelight and casting a crescent-shaped shadow on the floor like a wooden moon quietly glowing in the room. He stepped back a few paces, hands deep in his coat pockets, staring at the ring. It was more than just wood. It was a testament to a moment known only by him and that creature, an invisible bond yet stronger than any rope he'd ever used to secure a saddle. Outside, the wind swept past the roof, softly rattling the window. He looked up toward the forest. Nothing was visible, but in his heart, the answer was clear. This gift would remain here like a beacon, signaling whenever the giant shadow returned. The fireplace roared to life, warmth spreading throughout the cabin, dispelling the gray chill of early dawn. He stood leaning against the small window frame, a cup of hot coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the distant woods. Snow still clung to the pine branches, but the fog had thinned, revealing a trail winding into the darkness. Somewhere beyond sight, he imagined the giant figure moving among the trees, broad shoulders shaking snow off as it passed, large hands still carrying the scent of pine resin. He gave a slight nod toward that direction, a small gesture but full of meaning. Not a call nor a farewell, just a quiet confirmation I received it. Memories of the days when he lost his black horse returned. That hollow feeling, as if losing a part of himself, had haunted him for months. This morning, looking at the wooden ring hanging by the fireplace, he knew he had regained not just his horse, but the faith that in this vast world there still exist silent yet enduring connections. He took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth flow from his mouth down into his chest. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying a very soft sound, like a deep, slow sigh. No one but him heard it, but he understood. The wooden ring hung silently above the fireplace, catching the flickering firelight, each ray highlighting the mysterious grain patterns like flowing secret streams. He sat down in his old wooden chair, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes fixed on the gift. Outside, the snow slid softly from the roof, melting into the quiet. The black horse in the stable lightly stamped its hoof as if checking that everything remained safe. He smiled, the rare smile of a man who'd spent long winters living alone. No one else knew about this morning. No one knew the giant shadow had placed the gift silently on the fence. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that now, whenever he looked at the wooden ring, he would remember those eyes that trust, and the moment when two worlds once separate found their meeting point. He stood up, added another log to the fire. The flames surged, warmth wrapping around the room. He knew winter was still long, but inside another fire had been kindled, a fire that would not go out as long as the ring remained there. If one day you receive a gift from someone or something you never expected, would you keep it as a treasure or find a way to respond? Ending. The fireplace burned steadily, the crackling wood sounding like the heartbeat of the wooden cabin. The firelight flickered on the wall, gently illuminating the wooden ring hanging there. It stood quietly like a small wooden moon, holding a story only the two sides understood. He sat at the table, a steaming cup of coffee warming his rough hands. His gaze lingered on the ring, not out of curiosity, but because it made the room feel less empty. This winter was no longer just the sound of wind sweeping past the fence or long nights without a soul. Amid this silence, there was an invisible bond, stronger than any rope he had ever used to tie a saddle. He recalled the first moment he saw it on the fence, bathed in silver moonlight. Realizing it was a response to the gift, he had sent a reply without words or sound, yet enough to fill the voids winter left in the heart of a solitary man. Outside, the wind still carried the scent of pine and the dampness of the deep forest. He didn't know when the giant shadow would return or if it ever would, but he knew that between him and that creature there was something beyond language and distance, trust. Sometimes kindness transcends all boundaries, even between man and legend. Tell us, if a mysterious creature returned your most precious possession, what would you do? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this story touched you, remember to hold a moment of silence. For maybe somewhere out there, someone is quietly holding you too.